Hello, and welcome to the Flicks Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original film in the order of release. Today, we've got Netflix 113th film. It's the 2018 Norwegian crime drama, 22 July. Directed by Paul Greengrass, it stars Anders Danielsen Lee and John Øigarden. I am Jesse, and I'm here with MJ. How are you?
Good, mate. How are you?
Good. I'm excited.
You did well. You did well with the names. I know they're tough, and I think I'm proud of you. It was hard, but you did well.
Well, yeah, only two cast members because I don't want to push it out too much. And
I thought that was the choice as well.
Don't want to push the luck. So we are here ready to have a chat, and we start our show with our Fast Flicks, where we do our quick little summary of the film and what we think about it. So MJ, hit us off with your Fast Flicks.
22 July is about the events and aftermath of a brutal shooting in Norway based on a devastating true story.
Yep, perfect. It's along the same lines I've just said, the retelling of a horrible terrorist attack in Norway through the eyes of a survivor and the accused. All right, so this one, obviously based on real life, and there's a lot of true things that we can draw on from this one. So let's have a chat to start off with about how this was put together and how Netflix, I guess, got this film.
Yeah, it's always tricky talking about a film that's based on a true story, because when you're trying to critique it in any kind of way and think of things that you don't like and why they did certain things, the argument's always, well, that's what happened. So it's kind of going to be an interesting conversation that we just got to keep that in the back of our mind. And you know what? This being a true story, there's just going to be a ton of facts and information coming through here. So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't even really know much about the story and you don't want it to be spoiled for you, this is our spoiler alert. We are going to spoil the film and therefore spoil the story for you. It feels weird again saying spoil the story when it's kind of not meant to be like that. But if you are a big movie lover and you haven't seen this movie and you don't want it spoiled, probably turn off now and come back later and have a listen to our chat, because I'm interested to talk to Jesse about this one. But so how this film came about, obviously we know it is based on true events back from 2011, but August 21, 2017, that's when it got announced that Paul Greengrass was working on a new Netflix movie that was focused on these attacks and more so the aftermath of the attacks. And at that time, it actually caused a fair bit of controversy in Norway, just because it became known that the film was potentially going to give more of a voice to the main terrorist in this story, Anders Behring Breivik. And they had a campaign generating over 20,000 signatures against the film before they actually started making the film. So obviously, Paul Greengrass and his crew had to tread pretty carefully. Obviously, the events as well of this are quite devastating, quite real, quite close to home for a lot of people. So there was a lot of careful treading for all of this. And one of the main things that he did try to get around it was he used Norwegian actors and he used the whole Norwegian crew for the film. He wanted it to be identified as a Norwegian film, which it is. But he also revealed the fact that he didn't use Norwegian language, because he didn't speak Norwegian. It made life a little bit easier for him as a director, but also because he sees this as a universal story, not necessarily a story per se that everyone has been through, but a story that everyone should know and probably be aware of, that let's just have our wits about us to make sure this sort of stuff doesn't happen again. So so they obviously made this film. It had its premiere world premiere at the 75th Venice International Film Festival. And that was the 5th of September in 2018. And then it went on to screen at the Toronto International Film Festival, and that was the 10th of September in 2018. It also had a special presentation in Scandinavian theatres, October 4, before the film was released on the 10th of October 2018 on Netflix and also some select theatres. And it was actually originally scheduled to be released on the 2nd of November under the title Norway. Obviously, that got changed to 22 July. So the Netflix side of things, which I always like to get into. So they they want to be able to do. This is obviously not your standard popcorn movie, and Netflix basically want to be able to do what an art house release could do for a normal art house release by making this film. So they wanted to put it into relevant film festivals, but then they also get to link it to their platform with hundreds of millions of subscribers, most of them young people who probably wouldn't have gone to an art house theater to see this film. So it kind of works both ways for the industry, where you get your film festivals, so you get all the the critics and their eyeballs on it. So it does have that art house feel, but then all of a sudden you're getting it on this mass-produced subscription platform where people can watch it. So we're going to see it more. This is a 2018 film. We see it more coming with Netflix going from this point onwards, and it's a nice thing for art house movies to be able to live and have more of a life than they would normally from a theatrical release, but also still get that recognition from film festivals and the like. So it's kind of a little bit of a background on how the film came to be so far. And I'm sure there's things that you would like to add to what I've said.
Yeah, just not an awful lot. You've covered it pretty well. I think that just leading on from where you mentioned with Netflix and how they put it together, and director Greengrass, he made a bit of a commentary on why he decided to use Netflix as a distributor, because he wanted this to reach a young audience. And he had this question and answer while he was promoting the film, and he said that it's their generation who'll have to repel tomorrow the advances of the extreme right today. And so when we were considering the distribution partners, the Netflix model of theatrical distribution and streaming offered the best chance of reaching that broad young audience with material that's as challenging as this as well. So that was a nice little quote from him about just following on from what you mentioned with the reach of being on Netflix, which is nice to hear. And there is a little bit of a featurette on YouTube, almost like a special feature that we don't often quite get to see with a lot of Netflix films, where talks with a few of the cast and with the director. So I'll pop the link for that into the show notes if anyone's keen on checking it out. So that's a nice little thing to see. And you mentioned that it's based on, like the original title in Norway was One of Us, which is the book that it's based on by Asne Sørstad. So it is based on a recount of the events that are put into a book too. And you mentioned too, it played in a couple of cinemas. So it did take 166,500 at the box office, which is, obviously not a lot of money, but nice to see that there were people that went out of their way to see it on the screen as well. Budget of $20 million. Not too bad. Did you have any comparisons?
I did. And what, $20 million is not a terrible budget, to be honest, for Netflix. It's obviously not in the realms of The Irishman, but $20 million is more than we normally see, even though we often don't see what budgets they do have because they don't have to disclose it. But some comparisons for what you can get for a $20 million film in recent years is Us. Obviously, big bang for your buck money, that one. But even movies like La La Land, Wonder, Bad Mums, Glass with M. Night Shyamalan, that surprised me. That was only $20 million. Yeah. The Conjuring, obviously that started an enormous universe of horror films, and Good Boys, the teen comedy from last year. So $20 million is you can be pretty successful with that kind of budget.
Good. Well, so this was filmed across Iceland and Norway, and then it had a couple of nominations and awards, which has been nice to see recently with some of the films we've looked at. Had 2 wins and 3 other nominations. So the big one, I guess, was at the Venice Film Festival, like you mentioned. Paul Greengrass was also nominated for the Golden Lion for the best film for this as well, which is nice, and got the Cygnus Award for honorable mention, for Paul Greengrass. So a couple of nice little noms there for this film, I guess, as well.
That's cool. The other thing that I read, this is a weird fact. So in the film, there's an actor, and she is listed as defense lawyer number 1. So she's basically in what was his name? Lipstead. What's his name? Geir Lipstad. So he's got this group of counsel. So she plays defense lawyer number 1. The actor's name was Vivian Hine, and she actually plays her sister in the film. So her sister was actually
Ah,
Lipstad's assistant through this whole trial,
in real life.
and she played her in the film. That's awesome. Even though it was a
Yeah.
tiny role, I just think that's really cool.
That's a nice little connection. No, that's good. I had a percentage match for this one. I've got another one. On
What do you got?
66%. So
Okay.
not quite in the high sort of range, but getting very close to. I can't think of many Netflix matches that are lower than that. To be honest, 66 is pretty
Yeah.
low.
I also had one, and mine was at 80%. But
Ooh.
yeah, I can understand why. I can understand why why Netflix thought this would be an 80% match for me. But I mean, I'm a positive guy on Netflix. I don't. You know what? When I see a bad film, I forget to put the thumbs down. I'll be perfectly honest, I forget to. But when I watch a good film, I'm like, it was great. Bang, thumbs up. So maybe I've got to be a bit more consistent.
Good. Okay. Well, consensus time. What have the critics and the audiences said for this one?
It's not bad. Like, it's above par. It's sitting at a 6.8 out of 10 on IMDb, and that's off nearly 27,000 ratings. That's a really good score. IMDb being the main mass platform that we can look at for not critical consensus, more like fan consensus. But the 6.8 out of 10, very good score. A little bit lower on Letterboxd with a 3.1 out of 5, and that's off 13,500 ratings. So still pretty good. You're looking at something over a 3. It's watchable. It's not something that you want to steer away from, but you're certainly not expecting a masterpiece, and that's kind of where it sits from what I can gather.
Good. Yeah, Google users really like this, 89%, so up fairly high. And then
Yep.
our Rotten Tomatoes, it was certified fresh, another certified fresh 2 weeks in a
Good.
row, where it's got enough 125 critic reviews, and it sits on 81%, which is a nice robust sort of score. The audience had it fairly similar at 70%, but that was only on a bit over 800 reviews. So
Okay.
yeah, some fairly positive sorts of thoughts heading into this one, and I guess that's where we give our early thoughts on what we're thinking. So MJ, what are your early thoughts for this?
Yeah, so I thought it was pretty good. It was pretty tastefully covered. It still captured the enormity of this situation and like the devastation of these events. I think it probably got a little bit overindulgent in the character stories, and my interest certainly wavered throughout that part of the story. It was done no favors by having a 2 hour and 23-minute runtime. And now I'm not sure whether this was, because I have read somewhere that this was like a 3-part story. Now I'm not sure whether it was meant to be viewed that way or it was supposed to be viewed as a movie. It just felt like we went into these characters that, not that they weren't interesting, but we went into them too much, that there wasn't enough there to satisfy that runtime, is kind of how I felt about it. But I also need to say that I wasn't across these events. I don't know how I missed it, or whether not that I missed it, it just didn't stick with me. So this was all brand new information for me from the get-go. And that's obviously a point worth making, because I know you mentioned last week that this is something that you were looking forward to because you do remember the events.
Yeah, it's probably a really good lead in to what I was going to say, because at the end of last week I did mention that I vividly remember this event, and yeah, like I remember when it was on the news. I remember the footage that was coming through as it was happening, those types of things, and so a lot of the details weren't new for me. So it's sort of very run of the mill for me. It was very much, it's good for people to learn about the event and see the event, but it didn't really give me much more than that. And like you mentioned, it focuses on the stories of these 2 characters, I guess. Whereas I'm not sure whether there's more than 2 characters, obviously, but the main focus is on these 2 characters.
Mainly on 2, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether it could have benefited from, like you mentioned, like I mentioned at the end of last week too, that length, that time, like a bit of an edit, a bit of a cut down. You don't have to have such a big character piece when it's based on, because there's so many other stories that you could tell about this event as well. So an overall sort of retelling of these events possibly wouldn't have been such a bad thing. But yeah, you do see it from these perspectives that didn't really grip me as much as I was hoping, I guess.
I'm not surprised that you said that, because from my perspective, the more engaging part of the film was the first half an hour, which was the actual events, because it just kept blowing me away, like that this was actually happening. And if you already knew that, you're going into that completely differently because you're probably holding your breath a little bit because you know what you're about to see, and it's not going to be nice to see. With for me, I was like, oh crap, he's doing this. Oh crap, he's doing this. Oh, like it just kept going, and so I can, I'm not surprised that you said that. It would have been a lot harder to watch, I reckon.
Yeah, well, I reckon this is probably where we'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the characters from this one, and obviously, it wasn't our choice. The characters from this real event that they've focused on. So, and we don't want to. We're not criticizing the actual people from these stories. We're just talking about, I guess, the performances and how the characters are portrayed on screen more than anything. So,
how it fits within this film.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. How did you start with us?
Yeah, I think it's Villar is probably the one. Am I saying that correctly? Is it Viljar or Villar?
Villar sounds good to me. Yep.
Yeah. Look, and again, yeah, it's a really good lead in that you had because I found his story just a little bit tiresome and somewhat dissatisfying in that sense. That not that it was bad, because when you go through what he went through emotionally and physically, I expected as an audience member to have this greater feeling of payoff when he kind of made it through the other side. I never really got that, and I kind of got over the story by 75% of the way through, which sounds harsh, but it's just I was just done with seeing him recover and try and move through this. But as a character, like he was a smart, happy-go-lucky, popular guy, and they set that up really well. And he was a completely different person afterwards, and I think that is an important message to show. Those who survived, and survived being a really grey term in this film, they're never the same because it's not just because of the trauma that they experience, but there are literal physical ailments they are stuck with for the rest of their life. And I think that part of it they actually captured quite well. I think they just did it a little bit too much, and I got it. I had enough of seeing it. I didn't need to keep seeing it.
Yeah, I guess the ability for me to empathize with him, like even though he'd gone through such horrible things and the trauma, and like you mentioned, this about this recovery, even though those things had happened, I found it really hard to. I'm sure as a person I connect, but as the character, I was like they were just using him as like almost the complete opposite of the terrorist, and they set that up straight away with that camp where he's the one that gets picked out of the crowd to stand up and promote what he believes in, and welcoming everyone and regardless of nationalities, working together towards integration. And then you're seeing the complete opposite in this terrorist Anders, and I don't know if I needed that complete opposite, like to show you, like, I don't know. I just needed him as a human. I needed to see his humanity and see him recover as a person and not necessarily have to worry about him believing the complete opposite to the terrorist. Because I don't think there's anyone in the world, and they made mention of this, that supports the terrorist or think that what he's doing right. So we don't have to see that people believe other things. We get that. We understand that as an audience. So I think that frustrated me a little bit. And also the use of the relationships he has with people and using them to help recover himself and almost help them recover too, especially with his brother, Toy, like seeing his brother deal with that situation, and also with the girl in the same situation too. Was her name Lara? Sort of, yeah. I mean, it was just, I don't know. It was a bit choppy and changey for me. I would just like to have seen that recovery. Like there's enough in him in the hospital, in the rehab, in the operating room, all those things to see that he's gone through so much. I don't know that they needed to push it out as long as they did. But I completely understand he's probably, still got these issues today in real life and stuff. It's just the way it was shown on screen.
Yep. No, I agree with that. At the end of the day, you're making a film, right? So you need to engage an audience. And I get that there's a true story element, and I get that there's a story that needs to be told, but we still got to enjoy it to some extent. Enjoy is the wrong word.
Yeah. Who are you next?
Anders. Anders Bering Breivik. Huge Wikipedia page on the real person, to be honest. Like this guy is, oh goodness gracious me. But I probably found his story slightly more engaging. But it's probably more to do with figuring out how the hell he justifies this act. And again, I was left feeling pretty dissatisfied in this sense as well. I don't know if I ever really got the full behind the curtain look at what it takes to do something like this. The idea of having kids stranded on an island and you're out there hunting them for sport is an unimaginable evil, unimaginable. And the fact that he still appeared incredibly sane and calculated probably left me wanting more because they still didn't justify his mindset to me, and B, his calculatedness kind of came unstuck. Like it turns out he never really was in on a bigger picture. And so when both of those points are missing, I think it leaves this decent sized character hole. So whilst I was intrigued by him, I didn't get the answers that I wanted. This is one of the most notorious mass murderers in the history of the world, and you're making a movie of basically following his character, and I got no idea anything about him, and it's a missed opportunity for me.
Yeah, I completely agree, because you pretty much said this anyway. The idea that they constantly made it out that he was part of a bigger thing, he's part of this bigger group, and all this sort of like, the Knights Templar or whatever they were calling it, and they never really shut that idea down. They just let him keep coming up with these ideas and saying, oh no, there's going to be another attack. Oh, this is the third and final stage. This is what's going to happen. But there was never any situation where it was disjustified or shown that it's complete rubbish. There's nothing else that's going to happen. So that really, made it hard to connect, or not that you want to connect with him as a character, but to sort of see where this story is going with him, because like I mentioned before, he's that complete opposite of hating multiculturalism to what we had with Vilja. So the only thing that I could really try and draw on was this relationship he had with his lawyer, which I thought was probably one of the most sort of interesting little relationships in the film, where he's trying to say that this is going to be the best case of your life. This is going to be the best thing you do in your life. And you see nothing but hate from that lawyer the whole way. Just those facial expressions, couldn't make it any clearer that he doesn't want to work with him. And I just thought that was an interesting thing, because it'll lead into some questions later on that I've got about the Norwegian legal system, I guess, and how
I've got similar questions
because I got no idea. Goodness. All right, who have we got? Who have you got next to talk about?
Look, I do have the lawyer, Geir Lipstad. Probably similar. I always felt like there was a little bit of mystery around this character, or there was going to be more that came from it. I guess though, in hindsight, his story is just one more of that collateral damage that got dragged through this storm. Because in hindsight, I really felt for him, and I think he should be massively commended for his effort. And I really like that final scene where he completely shuts him out in his normal, quiet, matter-of-fact way. And I think we just need to talk about this right now.
Yeah.
Why can't he knock back that job? Is that not a thing? Like, I've chosen you as my lawyer, therefore you are my lawyer. Like, that's insane.
That's literally, you've literally covered everything I've got here. I've gone, so it's his duty to take the case, so the lawyers not get a choice in Norway, and then the constant phone calls to the house and telling his kid that they have to go to another school is really tough, which is what you mentioned. And then at the end, I really liked where he tells Anders that there's not one person who defends his actions after he'd met with the mum and the extremists. So exactly. I don't understand how that legal system works. That are they all paid by the state? All lawyers are paid.
That's
by the
what
state.
I mean. Who's paying him?
Yeah.
Or let's think of it as a legal system that we're more familiar with. If he chooses to do that job, is it because he's got this sincere belief that everyone has a right to a lawyer, and maybe this guy isn't going to get a fair trial if I don't take it on? Which again doesn't change the way you think about him, because he handled the whole thing with wonderful integrity, even though he was completely against the actions in a almost 180 degrees opposite mindset to Anders. There's no way he threw the case or did the wrong thing or all this kind. He still did everything by the book, which again is probably almost more commendable. But it was a big. They should have explained that, because it didn't add up to me.
Yep, I agree. Completely agree. I had Lara down as well, just to briefly touch on her. I just thought that this was another part that frustrated me, that she was on the island. Her sister didn't make it, so she's obviously there for this political rally almost, or political camp, or whatever they call it. And then they also make it clear that she's a refugee to the country. So she's just she's almost this another character that's there to stand against what Anders is playing and give Vilja someone to pump him up in the same way, when, like I mentioned before, I don't know that we necessarily needed to see him being pushed along by other people. We could have seen him be a strong character with that resilience himself to do it rather than needing her to push him, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, but speaking of resilience, God, she was so damn resilient. She was commendable throughout. If this is how someone actually handled that situation, then I take my hat off to you.
And then the PM, I just thought was probably the Prime Minister to talk about briefly that I thought it was an interesting way of showing this, that they weren't very critical of the way that the situation was dealt with prior, I guess. And obviously they say that they have this scene at the end where the people say, you know, we need you to lead us through this sort of thing. So I thought that was probably a good way of showing a political person in charge that wasn't necessarily critical of the way that they acted during a thing. So, I mean, if you see docos or dramatizations of things about 9/11, there's often critical aspects of leaders at the time or things like that. So I think they did a good job of keeping this sort of on par and not sort of bringing in different sides of how people believed that it was dealt with.
Yeah, also Paul Greengrass spoke to the Prime Minister prior to even speaking to the families whether they were actually going to make this film, and it was almost like, I'm going to speak to him first. If he says no, then I'm not even going to bother approaching the families to see if they're happy for the story to be told. And the Prime Minister had a pretty similar sentiment to most. It was just like, I think this is a story that does need to be told, and you've got my full blessing. And then obviously went to the families, and there was trepidation going to that, and they were almost. And he made an interesting point saying that the families are actually less likely than the general public to want to get this story made because they live with this every single day. Whereas the general public's like, we don't need to bring this brought up again. Whereas the family's like, I'm dealing with this every single day, and any kind of ability to have closure or at least have this conversation in the right public sphere is a good one. So they're all quite supportive of it as well. So I found that an interesting tidbit.
Probably leads into a little bit of a brief chat about Paul Greengrass. He's got a good CV. A couple of Bourne films, Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks. It's nice to have a big name director, I guess, do a Netflix film.
Yeah, and probably for the people that I just spoke about then, it's nice to have that credibility behind a film like this, knowing that it's going to be handled with care.
Yeah, 100%. All right, well, I think it's almost time to talk about some scenes. So we start off with ones that we enjoyed or thought were good. So what have you got for this one?
Yeah, well, like for me, I obviously didn't know what this film was about, and there was a period in the early part where I don't write many notes, but I wrote down a note that just said, "Holy shit, he is killing for sport," and that I have to put that down as a good scene because it was. I don't recall being so engaged in watching a movie than watching him on that island, just shooting kids, and on an island where they're completely helpless. Like, it was insanity. Like, this was Hunger Games type stuff. Like, it was unbelievable. And then that led into the next thing that really stuck with me was that slow scan through all the bodies, in the fields inside that little hut, and it was heart-wrenching. But I do think it was tastefully covered in a sense that it kind of this is the story that had to be shown. And when you hear that 77 lives were lost, it's just mind-blowing to me. Like yeah, so that was really powerful, that part of the film. And then I get into probably a few more dialogue heavy scenes that sort of stuck out for me, that highlighted the way people would handle this kind of PTSD or just that trauma in general. But the conversation between Villar and Lara at the hospital, where they talk about how I can't see the future. I think this was really well captured, where they sort of speak about the fact that they survived and what does survival even mean, and I don't even know what survival means. And I think not only is that a good depiction of how these people are probably feeling, but I think as an audience member, I was kind of feeling like that as well, that it's all well and good that you guys are alive, but I don't know where you go from here. And I was kind of stuck with them. And I thought that came across really nicely on screen. And then probably the next thing that I did like was when that right wing guy that they found to testify court basically shot down Anders' perspective of himself and that entire situation. And this to me was more satisfying than seeing any of the survivors talk or lay into Anders or anything like that, because this was one guy that Anders thought was sort of on his side, and yeah, I'm doing this for you and all of us. And he was just like, this guy's a dickhead. Like, I don't condone anything that he's done. So that was pretty satisfying in a film where I was expecting more satisfaction. That's probably as satisfied as I got. And the other things I will mention, that I appreciated Lara's testimony, talking about the guilt that she feels. And again, I like the fact that her testimony had nothing to do with Anders in general. It was just literally talking about how she's felt from the situation. And I did like Villiers' confession as well, and the powerful dialogue of "I survived and I choose to live." A little bit cliche and probably didn't get the feels as much as it could have, but yeah. I respected it. It was there.
Nice. Yeah, it was really hard for me to pick specific scenes for this one. So I think, I've just got a couple of there's one, like you've already mentioned, that the scene from Anders leaving Oslo in the truck to head out towards that island. That moment he gets on that boat, I knew what was going to come, but the tension I still felt was extreme. And from that moment that he steps off and the guy asks him for his ID, that was still like it was just such perfect timing, and they did such a good job of showing that moment. And yes, like you mentioned, it was tastefully done, and it was engaging. Like you just were feeling the horror and the fear of these kids, and especially when they're hanging off the sides of those cliffs, and is his head going to actually pop over? It's one of those moments. They do it in films so many times, but it was just done so well. And I mean, that to me is the standout of this film. I think that first part was massively engaging, and it sort of dropped off a little bit there from me when it sort of became a bit more not courtroomy, but more just focusing on. I don't even know if it's because they put too much focus on Anders, because you don't really want to give him that much time, but I guess they wanted to show you what his thinking behind some of this stuff was. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, but they still didn't really show you what he was thinking. That's what pissed me off.
Yeah. All right. What are some things that didn't stand out, or we want to forget?
Yeah. And again, this is probably not a scenes per se, but this is probably the way things transpired. And I was probably about an hour into this film, and I really started to wonder where it was going. Was it going to be a film about this court case? And if so, like, I already know that they've got the guy. Like, that there was not that idea of we've got to catch this criminal before he strikes again. He's sitting there in a jail cell, and so that wasn't appealing to me. And then the next thing is this all about Villiers' recovery? And that wasn't pulling me in either. So I'm sitting here knowing I've got 90 minutes to go, and I don't know where this film's going, because the two options feel like they're basically closed doors already. And that's kind of how it was. And that goes to the next thing that it didn't really get me, was I felt really dissatisfied watching Villiers' recovery. Like, this film got to a point where it was all kind of leading up to Villiers meeting Anders in court. And I just don't know how much I cared about that. At the time, so when it happened, I didn't really care about it. But going into it, I wasn't like, I just can't wait till he gets into court. It just didn't bother me. And there was just something really unsatisfying about that being kind of the goal that we were going to get to. And so you're sort of just plowing through this film, and it was a bit hard to swallow.
Yeah, I think I probably mentioned that briefly before when we're talking about the recovery that he had to face. So one of the things that really, there's a scene where he steals that sort of snowmobile and drives off in the snow, and the parents sort of chase him. I think I already understood the pain he was feeling. I already understood the recovery he needed to make in a film that's 2.5 hours long nearly. Like, there's just bits and pieces of this that it gets a little bit repetitive. We see so much of what he's doing already that we don't necessarily need to see extra scenes of him going through tough things, even though I know that in real life this is probably something that happened. So that's okay. All right, good.
Yeah,
so all right, good. So I guess this is where we talk about some themes and some ideas in the film. What have you got for us, MJ? I might just pause for a second, and I might kick it off to go with this to start off with. We're having a few difficulties with some of our audio at the moment, but we'll keep pushing on and we'll get through there. So the themes and ideas that this one sort of showed for me was Norway, I guess, as a country. There's this obviously a little bit of tension going on in Norway, and I guess you sort of get this commentary from Anders's mum, when she's interviewed by Gear, and she sort of says that, it's not like what it used to be. And I think that there's this idea of nationalism throughout this film as well, that they're pumping up this idea that the country are fighting this together, the country are in it together. And I just think that was a nice little way of putting that through the film as well. And obviously on the opposite side of things too, this idea of extreme political activism or extremism that obviously runs throughout society in various ways in multiple countries. And I guess they didn't really give us a good explanation of what was going on apart from Anders, but there's obviously other sectors in that society that do exist that he thought were there to support him. Last little bit too is this idea of last little bit is survival, and what's it mean to survive? If the pain's constant, there's physical pain, there's mental pain. How do you survive if there's something that's, these bullet fragments are stuck in his head for almost the rest of his life? So how's he going to be able to deal with this? And they do a good way in, saying this is about life too. You choose to live, you choose to go on and continue with life. So
yeah, I wasn't sure if that was going to come back, the whole brain fragment thing. Sorry about my audio. My headphones are dying and the cord's not working. So if it drops out, I might have to go to the speaker of the computer, and we'll deal with that when we get to it. But the only other thing I sort of wanted to add from a themes perspective was that the whole PTSD side of things, and how widespread that impact actually is, how it covers a vast amount of people who are certainly not directly connected with the incident at all. And you're obviously looking at Villiers' parents and the way that they sort of need to have different perspectives on it. I think that kind of stands out for me, that this, just because there was a couple of hundred people on this island doesn't mean that a couple of hundred people are the ones that are, directly impacted by it. So, and I think that this idea of evil, and it's, the most insidious type of evil that we've encountered probably in any film that we've done on this podcast. And exploring that. I don't think they explored that perfectly, but it's impossible not to have that feeling of evil every time Anders is on screen or even spoken about, really.
Yeah, good points. All right, well, what did you take away from this one in the end?
Yeah, not knowing this story, I mean, 8 dead in Oslo and 69 in Utoya was just, holy crap. Like that's just next level, right? But from a film perspective, it felt like two very different movies. The first half an hour was heart racing and heart wrenching, but it had that whole "I can't look away" type feel, and the rest of it, the pace was just completely taken out of it. And we'd already caught our killer. We were focusing on survivors, and the crux of the movie became an exploration on dealing with this trauma in their lives. And I found that a little bit harder to swallow, but it had a little bit of a Patriots Day feel to it. The Mark Wahlberg movie about the Boston Marathon. Was it Boston Marathon? Yeah.
Yep.
The bombing, and that the start of it had a really similar feel, but both movies do take off in very different directions after the incident, because in Patriots Day, they're obviously trying to find the killer. There's a real threat that the killer is going to strike again. But this one went down a very different route.
You're right. Yeah, good points. To me, the runtime is probably a little bit excessive. If you don't know the story, and I'm sure it's an interesting watch, and if you don't, I guess, want to feel too emotional, like this is the sort of film to me that you need to have your heartstrings pulled a bit. And usually there are films like this that I get on board because I feel, emotive about what's going on. Whereas this one, I didn't. And that's a little bit sad that I should be feeling pain. I should be feeling sorrow. I should be wanting them to get justice against this guy. And it just sort of just ran along and that was it. That's
that's wonderfully summed up.
Yeah. Did you jump onto IMDb to check anyone out for this?
No, I didn't. No, did you?
I went on Google Maps. I thought.
Yes, I love what you do this.
I went on. I was a bit confused by the ability of Vilger's parents to get from the city to the island to. They were just like hopping from hospital to the shelter to all these places, and just seemed like they were doing this all so quickly. I just looked up how far the drive from Oslo to the island was. It was about 40 minutes. So realistically, it makes sense if you know that. But just in the fragment of the filmmaking experience, it was just a little bit jumpy. I was like, oh, they're getting around a bit.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. All right, good. Question time. Have you got any questions you want to ask?
Look, apart from the obvious that we've already spoken about with the legal system in Norway, the other question for me, the trial was televised. Is that Was that? Did that happen? Like he was watching it on TV. I'm pretty sure.
He did, yeah, wasn't he? Because that was like, yeah, him keeping up with what was going on.
That feels like another strange part of their legal system.
Yeah, that's a good point. Didn't even think about that. I've got a quote from Paul Greengrass about when he was making the film, turn into a question. So he had this idea not to sensationalize the attacks. He wanted to attempt to do something serious. And to do this, we have to confront this so that people understand what happened and what's happening now. Do you think that he accomplished this goal? Did he do a good job of making sure that people understand what's happening, and rather than trying to glamorize what happened, I guess?
I certainly think he did a good job of not over glamorizing. Whether the idea of making people alert to what's happening, I don't know if that was as clear. Guess what? It highlights what people might be capable of. But politically, I don't know if that was. Maybe I just didn't take that out of it.
Yeah, same. I reckon. I think that's a good answer. Last one was the relationships that Vilja had with Lara and his brother. Did they do a good enough job of showing how each of them affected his recovery, or do you think that like they could have just wiped that whole process out?
To be honest, I actually liked his brother Toye.
Yeah.
I liked that he had his own little mini story. And he went through absolute hell, and no one kind of bothered to check how he was because physically he was fine. And we don't really know what he wants until the end, when he sort of gives him a hug and says, like, thank you for doing this. Because they sort of needed some resolution as to what the hell was going on with him mentally. And I kind of thought of him as his own little character with his own little story, as opposed to being part of Vilja's story, which I appreciated. I actually didn't have much of an issue with either of these relationships. I don't think they were as important to Vilja's recovery as maybe they could have been. I think it was kind of a lot of his was internalized and how he dealt with it. And Lara maybe was more just inspiration for the way that she was handling it.
Yeah, I was just thinking from an editing point of view, if you needed to cut a bit of time out, you can get it under 2 hours quite easily.
Yeah.
All right, time to wrap this up. So we give a rating out of 5 for our films and then give it a Flix Forum average. So what are your final summary for this one, MJ?
I think this movie is powerful, and I can't imagine what the people involved in this event went through, or even the country of Norway in general. That's how big this event was and how big this film, what this film tried to cover. So I think it succeeds in grabbing my attention and, to be honest, chilling me to my core with its depiction of this event, but it really misses the mark in keeping me engaged throughout with the subsequent character stories. It's still 3 stars for me.
Good. Nice. Well, yeah, I think, like I mentioned, started off extremely well. The tension, the fear I felt was really good at the start, but then it sort of drifted off a little bit with this expanded runtime and focus on some characters that just didn't really sit right with me. And I get it's extremely tricky when they're based on real people. And I think it's still worth a watch if you know nothing about this event, and it'd be worthwhile understanding one of these really traumatic experiences that we've seen. So it's also a 3 for me, which is an average of a 3 for us, which is a nice solid little score for this film.
We haven't done that for a while. Hit the exact same mark.
Yeah, it has been a while, hasn't it? We are on social media. We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we've got Instagram. You can follow us along, give our posts a like if you can. Question that I wanted to put out there this week is, what is something that you relate to Norway? Just
Jeez.
I think this is probably a very centric question for me, because straight away I'm like, the Norway Pavilion in Epcot and Frozen.
Frozen. I don't know. Norway doesn't really spring to mind for me. Yeah, snow would be the first thing I think of.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I was just going down that path. So we are back again next week, and it's the month of October, I guess. So Halloween's not too far away, and I think we have a period horror film, horror film from 2018 called Apostle. It's directed by Gareth Evans. It stars Dan Stevens, Lucy Boynton, Mark Lewis Jones, Bill Milner, Christine Froseth, Paul Higgins, and Michael Sheen. So next week, period horror film.
I was thinking, because I know we're at a point where we're like almost 2 years to the date behind in the way we record. And I was like, oh, I wonder if we're going to get some Halloween stuff around Halloween time. So there you go. I didn't look ahead because that would be too easy. But I thought, I wonder what's going to pop up, and here we are. So that's good.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for the chat. Good to see you as usual, and see you next week.
All right, back at you, mate. See you then.